The Mexican bandit crossed the border to rob a bank and found his long-lost sister working behind the counter. Joaquín Morales rode in for gold, but found his sister alive behind the bank counter, the girl he thought burned to ashes a decade ago. She spoke his name like a prayer, and everything changed. This is the story of loss, betrayal, and the bond that not even death could break. The sun hung low over Redemption Creek like a dying coal, casting long shadows across the dirt road that split the town in half. Joaquín Morales pulled his hat down over his eyes and felt the weight of his Colt .45 against his thigh. The leather holster was worn smooth from years of use, years of running, years of taking what the world had taken from him first. His horse moved slow beneath him, hooves making soft sounds in the dust. The animal was tired. They had ridden hard from the border, through desert and scrub, past the places where decent men feared to go. But Joaquín was not a decent man anymore. That boy had died 10 years ago in the flames that took everything he loved. The town was quiet in the way that small towns get quiet when strangers ride in. Windows showed faces that disappeared like smoke. Doors closed with soft clicks. Even the dogs seemed to hold their breath. Joaquín had seen it all before. Fear was a language he spoke fluently now. He tied his horse to the post outside the Redemption Creek Bank and Trust. The building was small and square, made of wood that had been painted white once, but now showed the scars of too many seasons. A sign creaked in the evening breeze. The letters were faded but still readable. Safe deposits. Honest dealings. Trust in tomorrow. Trust. The word tasted bitter in his mouth. Joaquín checked his pistol one more time. 6 bullets. More than enough for what needed doing. The bank would have maybe $50 in the till, maybe $100 if he was lucky. It wasn't much, but it would buy him passage north, away from the men who hunted him, away from the memories that followed him like hungry wolves. He had robbed banks before. Small ones like this, places where the sheriff was old and the customers were farmers who kept their money under mattresses. Easy targets. Clean work. Nobody got hurt if they were smart about it. The door opened with a small bell's chime. Inside, the bank was cool and dim. Wooden floors. A single desk. A safe in the corner that looked older than the town itself. And behind the counter, counting coins into small piles, stood a young woman with dark hair, pulled back in a simple braid. She looked up when she heard the bell. Time stopped. Joaquín's hand froze halfway to his gun. His breath caught in his throat like a fishbone. The woman behind the counter had eyes the color of coffee beans, skin touched golden by the sun, and a small scar on her chin where she had fallen from a tree when she was 7 years old. Isabella, his sister. His little sister who had called him Quinn and followed him everywhere and picked wildflowers to put in their mother's hair. Isabella, who had been sleeping in the back room when the fire started. Isabella, whose body he had never found in the ashes of their home. Isabella, who was supposed to be dead. She stared at him across the small space of the bank, and he saw recognition dawn in her eyes like sunrise over the desert. Her hand went to her throat. Her lips formed a single word, barely a whisper. Quinn. The sound of his name in her voice hit him harder than any bullet. He stood there, hat in his hands, suddenly feeling like the boy he used to be. The boy who had promised to protect her. The boy who had failed. Isabella. His voice came out rough as sandpaper. You're alive. She nodded, tears starting to well in her eyes. You're here. Behind him, the door chime rang again. Joaquín spun around, his hand moving to his gun out of pure instinct. An old man in a worn suit entered, glanced at Joaquín with mild curiosity, then walked to the counter. Afternoon, Miss Morales, the man said. Like to make a withdrawal if you don't mind. Miss Morales. She had kept their name. Even here, in this place where no one knew their story, she had kept the name of their father, the name of the family that was supposed to have died in flames 10 years ago. Isabella's hands shook as she opened the cash drawer. She counted out bills for the old man, her movements careful and precise. Professional, as if her world had not just cracked open like an egg. The old man took his money and tipped his hat. Much obliged, miss. You have yourself a good evening now. He left, and they were alone again. Isabella came around the counter slowly, as if she was walking through a dream. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough to touch, close enough to see the lines that 10 years had carved around his eyes. "I looked for you," she whispered. "After the fire. I looked everywhere." Joaquín wanted to reach for her, wanted to pull her close like he used to when she had nightmares. But his hands felt heavy as stone. There was too much blood on them now. Too many sins weighing them down. "I thought you were dead," he said. "I searched the ruins. I found Mama and Papa, but I never found you. I was visiting Señora Martinez that night. Remember? She lived by the river. When I came home in the morning." Isabella's voice broke. Everything was gone. Everyone was gone. She had grown beautiful, he realized. The little girl with scraped knees and tangled hair had become a woman with quiet strength in her shoulders and kindness in her eyes. But she was too thin, and there were shadows under those coffee-colored eyes that spoke of years lived too carefully. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Where have you been all this time?" The question hung between them like smoke. Joaquín felt the weight of his gun, the weight of the wanted posters with his face on them, the weight of all the choices that had led him here. How could he tell her about the years of anger, the men he had ridden with, the banks he had robbed, the laws he had broken, the blood he had spilled? How could he tell her that the brother she remembered was as dead as the rest of their family? Outside, the sun slipped lower. Soon it would be dark. Soon the sheriff would make his evening rounds. Joaquín had planned to be long gone by then, saddlebags full of gold, riding hard toward the border with no one the wiser. Instead, he stood in a bank in Redemption Creek, staring at a ghost made flesh, wondering if some prayers were answered too late to matter. Isabella stepped closer. Her hand reached out, hesitated, then touched his cheek with fingers soft as feathers. "You're real," she whispered. "You're really here." And for the first time in 10 years, Joaquín Morales felt something other than hate burning in his chest. Isabella's hand stayed on his cheek, and Joaquín closed his eyes. Her touch was warm against skin that had felt nothing but cold for 10 years. When he opened his eyes again, she was crying. Silent tears that caught the last light from the window and fell like rain on drought-cracked earth. "I never stopped looking," she whispered. "Even when people said I was foolish. Even when they said ghosts don't come back." The bank felt smaller now, the walls closer. Joaquín could hear his heart beating like thunder in his chest. His hand moved toward his gun without thinking, then stopped. Old habits. When cornered, when confused, when the world turned sideways. Reach for iron. Reach for the thing that never failed to solve problems. But this was not a problem a gun could fix. Isabella saw the movement, saw his hand hover near the holster. Her eyes went wide, and she stepped back. "You're in trouble," she said. It was not a question. Joaquín let his hand fall to his side. "I'm in more trouble than you can imagine, Jimena." The word slipped out before he could stop it. Sister. Little sister. The name he had called her when she was small, and the world was simple, and their biggest worry was whether Mama would make tortillas for supper. Isabella's face crumpled. She pressed both hands to her mouth to hold back a sob. "I knew you were alive," she said through her fingers. "I felt it. Here." She touched her heart. "People said I was crazy, but I knew." Outside, the town was settling into evening. Joaquín could hear the sounds of normal life. Doors closing. Mothers calling children home for supper. The clip-clop of a horse pulling a wagon down the main street. Sound from a world he no longer belonged to. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me what happened after the fire." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She walked to the window and looked out at the dusty street. When she spoke, her voice was steady but distant, like she was telling someone else's story. "I was at Señora Martinez's house. Her grandson was sick, and she asked me to help watch him. I was going to come home that night, but the boy got worse, and she begged me to stay." Isabella's fingers traced patterns on the glass. "I fell asleep in a chair by his bed. When I woke up, the whole sky was orange." Joaquín remembered the sky that night, how it looked like the world was ending, how the smoke made the stars disappear. "I ran home," Isabella continued. "But by the time I got there," she shook her head. "There was nothing left, just ashes and broken things, and the smell of—" She couldn't finish. "I know," Joaquín said softly. I was there too. I got back from town just as a roof fell in. They had both been gone when it started. Both been somewhere else when their world burned down. It should have been a comfort, knowing neither of them could have stopped it. Instead, it felt like another weight to carry. The whole town came to help, Isabella said. They searched through everything, looking for. She paused. They found Mama and Papa, and they found your hat. The brown one with the silver band that Papa gave you for your 15th birthday. It was burned and torn, but they knew it was yours. Joaquín remembered that hat. He had loved it, worn it everywhere. Lost it in the chaos of that terrible night. So they thought I was dead too. We had a funeral, Isabella said, for all three of you. I stood there in my black dress and listened to Father Miguel say prayers for my dead brother. Her voice broke again. I wanted to scream that you weren't really gone. That I would have known if you were gone, but nobody would have believed me. Joaquín walked to the counter and leaned against it. His legs felt weak, like they might not hold him up much longer. 10 years of running, and it all came down to this. A small bank in a forgotten town, and a sister who had mourned him while he mourned her. What did you do then? He asked. I lived with Señora Martinez for a while, then with the priest's family. They were kind, but Isabella turned from the window. I didn't belong anywhere. I was the girl whose family burned up. The girl who talked to dead people. Isabella. I started traveling when I turned 18. Town to town, looking for work, looking for you. I worked in stores, cleaned houses, helped on farms. Always asking if anyone had seen a young man who looked like our Papa. Dark hair, dark eyes about this tall. She held up her hand. Most people thought I was touched in the head. She had been searching for him. While he was robbing banks and running from the law, she had been looking for the boy he used to be. The boy who would never come home because he had died in those flames just as surely as if his body had been found in the ashes. How did you end up here? He asked. 3 years ago, I got sick. Fever that lasted for weeks. A family in the next town overtook care of me, nursed me back to health. When I was well enough to travel, I had no money left. No strength left either. Isabella sat down heavily in the chair behind the counter. Mr. Henderson, the man who owns this bank, he needed someone to help with the books. Someone who could read and write and count money. I've been here ever since. It's a good job, Joaquín said, though the words felt hollow. It's honest work, Isabella replied, and there was something in her voice that made him look at her sharply. I sleep in a room above the general store. I eat supper with Mrs. Chun and her family most nights. I go to church on Sundays. People here know me as Isabella Morales, the girl who works at the bank. Not as the girl whose family died. The way she said it made it clear what she thought of dishonest work, of men who took what wasn't theirs, of brothers who carried guns and rode with outlaws. The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Joaquín wanted to tell her about the years after the fire, about the anger that had eaten him alive, about the men who had found him half dead and crazy with grief, and taught him how to turn pain into violence, about the banks and the stages and the payrolls, and how each job made it easier to forget the boy who had picked wildflowers with his sister. But he couldn't find the words, and maybe there weren't words for what he had become. You never married, he said instead, noticing the lack of a ring on her finger. Isabella smiled, but it was a sad smile. Hard to marry a ghost, Quinn. Every man I met, I compared to my dead brother, to the boy I remembered. None of them measured up to a memory. The weight of her words settled on him like stones. She had been alone all these years, carrying his memory like a sacred thing. And here he stood, the flesh and blood reality, with dirt under his nails and blood on his conscience, and wanted posters with his face scattered across 3 territories. I'm not that boy anymore, he said quietly. I can see that. Isabella's eyes moved to his gun, to the hard lines around his mouth, to the way he stood like a man ready to fight or run at any moment. But you're still my brother. The love in her voice was a knife in his chest. He had forgotten what it felt like to have someone look at him and see something worth saving. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear. Soon the saloon would fill with men, looking to forget their troubles in whiskey and cards. Soon the sheriff would lock the jail and head home to his wife and supper. Soon this moment would end, and he would have to decide what came next. But for now, he stood in the gathering darkness with his sister, surrounded by the weight of all the years between them, and wondered if redemption was something a man could steal, or if it had to be earned one painful step at a time. The sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk outside made Joaquín's hand move to his gun before his mind caught up. Heavy steps. Steady. The walk of a man who carried authority in his stride and knew every inch of his territory. Isabella heard it too. Her eyes went wide with understanding. "The sheriff," she whispered. "He makes his evening roundabout now." Joaquín's heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Sheriff Tom Bradley had been hunting him for 3 years, ever since the job in Tucson went wrong and a bank guard died. Bradley was old but smart, patient as winter and twice as cold. His wanted posters said dead or alive, and Joaquín knew which option the sheriff preferred. The footsteps stopped outside the bank. "Is there a back way out?" Joaquín asked quietly. Isabella shook her head. "Just the front door and the windows." The windows were small and high. He might make it through one, but not quickly, not quietly, and not without leaving Isabella to explain why a strange man had been in the bank after closing time. The door handle turned. Isabella moved without thinking. She stepped in front of Joaquín, her small body blocking him from view, just as the door opened with its familiar chime. "Evening, Miss Morales." Sheriff Bradley's voice was deep and gravelly, worn rough by too many years of hard conversations. "Working late again?" "Good evening, Sheriff," Isabella said. Her voice was steady, but Joaquín could see her hands shaking at her sides. "Just finishing up the daily count." Bradley stepped into the bank. He was a big man, tall and broad across the shoulders, with gray hair and eyes like winter sky. His badge caught the lamplight. His gun sat easy on his hip, worn smooth by years of use. Those winter eyes swept the room and landed on Joaquín. Time slowed to the pace of honey dripping from a spoon. Joaquín saw recognition dawn on the sheriff's face. Saw the man's hand drift toward his weapon. Saw 10 years of running come down to this moment in a small-town bank with his sister standing between him and the law. Well, Bradley said softly. "Joaquín Morales. Been looking for you a long time, son." Isabella stepped sideways, still trying to shield him. "Sheriff, I can explain. No need for explaining, miss." Bradley's voice was gentle but firm. "I know who this is. Question is, what's he doing here?" Joaquín's Colt was in his hand before he remembered drawing it. The familiar weight of the gun steadied him, gave him something solid to hold onto when everything else was spinning like leaves in a dust devil. "Easy, son," Bradley said. He hadn't drawn his own weapon yet, but his hand rested on the grip. "No need for gunplay. Not with the lady present." "Let me walk out of here," Joaquín said. "No one has to get hurt." "Can't do that." Bradley shook his head slowly. "You know I can't do that." Isabella turned to face Joaquín. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice was strong. "Put the gun down, Quinn," she said. "Please." "You don't understand," Joaquín said. "If I put this gun down, I'm a dead man." "No," Isabella said. "If you use that gun, you're a dead man. And I'll lose you again." The three of them stood frozen in the lamplight like figures in a painting. The outlaw, the lawman, and the woman who loved them both in different ways. Outside, the town went about its evening business, unaware that a decade of pain and loss and wrong choices had come together in this small room. "Your sister's right," Bradley said. "Been chasing you for 3 years, Joaquín. You're fast and you're smart, but you can't run forever. Sooner or later, it ends. Question is how." Joaquín's gun never wavered, but his mind was racing. He could shoot Bradley. He was faster, younger. The sheriff was good, but Joaquín had stayed alive this long by being better. But if he killed the law in front of Isabella, she would never forgive him, never look at him the same way. "There's paper on you in 4 territories," Bradley continued. "Banks, stages, that payroll job in Silver Creek. But the thing that really got my attention was Tucson." Isabella's face went pale. "What happened in Tucson?" Joaquín closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped she would never have to know, never have to hear about the worst thing he had done. "Tell her," Bradley said quietly. She deserves to know what kind of man her brother became. Quinn. Isabella's voice was small, frightened. Joaquín opened his eyes and looked at his sister. At the woman who had searched for him for 10 years, who had kept his memories sacred, who still saw something worth saving in him. The bank guard in Tucson, he said. He was just a boy. 18, maybe 19. He tried to be brave. Joaquín's voice broke. I told him to step aside. Told him not to be a hero. But he wouldn't listen. He drew on me. Isabella's hand went to her throat. What did you do? I killed him. The words fell between them like stones in still water. I shot that boy dead. And his mother cried over his grave. And somewhere there's a girl who was supposed to marry him who will wear black for the rest of her life. Silence filled the bank like smoke. Isabella stared at him as if seeing a stranger. As if the brother she remembered had just died all over again. It was self-defense, Joaquín said quickly. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Bradley said. You could have found honest work. Could have started over somewhere. Instead, you chose to keep taking what wasn't yours. And you could have left me alone, Joaquín snapped. Could have let sleeping dogs lie. That boy in Tucson was somebody's son, Bradley replied. Just like you're somebody's son. Just like she's somebody's sister. He nodded toward Isabella. My job is to make sure people pay for their choices. Isabella was crying now, but she stepped closer to Joaquín instead of backing away. It doesn't have to end like this, she said. You could surrender. Stand trial. Maybe what? Joaquín laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maybe they'll only hang me a little bit. Maybe you'll live, she said fiercely. Maybe there's still hope. 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 The word was foreign on her tongue, strange as a prayer spoken in a dead language. Joaquín had given up on hope the night he watched his world burn. Had learned to live on hate and fear and the bitter satisfaction of taking from others what life had taken from him. But looking at Isabella's face, streaked with tears but blazing with love, he felt something stir in his chest. Something small and fragile, like the first green shoots pushing through winter ground. Think about it, Bradley said. You surrender quiet-like. I'll make sure you get a fair hearing. Judge Miller's a reasonable man. Maybe the sentence won't be death. Maybe isn't good enough, Joaquín said. It's all any of us get, the sheriff replied. Maybe is all the hope any man can ask for. Isabella took another step closer. I found you again, Quinn. After 10 years, I found you. Doesn't that mean something? Doesn't that mean we're supposed to have more time together? The gun was getting heavy in his hand. Or maybe his arm was just tired of carrying the weight of all his sins. Behind Isabella, he could see the bank's safe, still locked, still holding whatever small fortune this town had managed to scrape together. He had come here to rob this place, to take what he needed and disappear into the night like he always did. Instead, he had found the one person in the world who still believed there was something good left in him. And now he had to choose between the life he had built and the life he had lost. Between the outlaw who had survived by never trusting anyone and the brother who had once promised to protect his little sister from all the darkness in the world. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Joaquín realized that some choices were too big to make with a gun in your hand. The gun fell from Joaquín's fingers and hit the floor with a sound like thunder. The metal rang against the wood, then settled into silence. 3 people stood breathing in the lamplight, and the world shifted on its axis like a wheel finding its true course. Sheriff Bradley bent slowly and picked up the Colt. He checked the cylinder, then tucked the weapon into his belt. His movements were careful, respectful. This was not the frantic grab of a lawman disarming a dangerous criminal. This was something different, something quieter. That took courage, son, Bradley said. Isabella's knees gave out. She sank into the chair behind the counter and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Joaquín wanted to go to her, wanted to hold her like he used to when she had nightmares. But he wasn't sure he had the right anymore. Wasn't sure what rights a man had left after he laid down his gun and admitted to all his sins. What happens now? He asked. Bradley pulled out a pair of iron shackles. Now I arrest you. Read you the charges. Take you to jail to wait for the circuit judge. He paused, but that can wait until morning. Tonight, You say goodbye to your sister. The kindness in the sheriff's voice was harder to bear than anger would have been. Joaquín had expected hatred, expected to be treated like the animal he had become. Instead, this old lawman was giving him a gift he didn't deserve. "Thank you," Joaquín said quietly. Bradley nodded. He walked to the door and turned the sign from open to closed, drew the curtains over the windows. "I'll be right outside," he said. "Take all the time you need." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Isabella looked up from her hands. Her eyes were red and swollen, but they were clear. "Why?" she asked. "Why'd you put the gun down?" Joaquín sat on the edge of the desk. His legs felt unsteady, like he was learning to walk all over again. "Because you asked me to," he said simply. "Because I remembered what it felt like to be your brother." She stood and walked to the window. Outside, they could see Sheriff Bradley leaning against the wall, giving them privacy but staying close enough to do his job. A good man trying to balance justice with mercy. "I'm scared," Isabella said. "Of me? For you?" She turned to face him. "They might hang you, Quinn. They might take you away from me again, and this time it will be forever." The truth of it sat between them like a stone. Joaquín had killed a man, had robbed banks and stages, and lived outside the law for 10 years. There was no going back from that. No undoing what was done. "Maybe," he said, "but at least this time you'll know what happened to me. You won't have to spend years wondering if I'm alive or dead. That's not enough. It has to be." Isabella walked to him slowly. She reached out and took his hands in hers. They were rough now, callous from years of hard living. Not the soft hands of the boy, she remembered. But they were warm, and they were real, and they were here. "Tell me about the years," she said. "Tell me about the boy who picked wildflowers with his sister." Joaquín smiled, and for a moment the years fell away like old skin. "He loved you more than anything in the world. He used to sneak extra tortillas from Mama's kitchen and leave them by your bed when you were sick. He taught you to whistle and to skip stones and to catch fireflies in mason jars. He promised to always protect me," Isabella said softly. "And he failed." "No." Her grip on his hands tightened. "He got lost for a while, but he found his way back." They sat in the quiet bank as the night deepened around them. Through the windows, they could see stars beginning to appear in the desert sky. The same stars that had watched over them as children. The same stars that had witnessed their family's destruction and now, perhaps, the first small step toward healing. "Will you write to me?" Isabella asked. "In prison, I mean." "If they—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Every week," Joaquín promised. "I'll tell you about the books I read, the men I meet, the things I learn. And you can tell me about Redemption Creek, about your job at the bank, about the life you're building here. It won't be the same as having you here. No, but it will be something. It will be a connection." He squeezed her hands. "And if they don't hang me, if somehow I get through this, maybe someday I can come back. Maybe I can be the kind of man who deserves a sister like you." Isabella leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. Brother and sister, reunited by chance and separated again by justice, but connected now by something stronger than either. "I have money saved," she said. "Not much, but enough to hire a lawyer. Someone good. Isabella, don't argue with me. You're my brother. I'm going to fight for you." The love in her voice was a balm on wounds he had carried for 10 years. Joaquín felt tears on his cheeks and didn't try to wipe them away. He had forgotten what it felt like to cry for something other than rage or loss. These were different tears, cleaner somehow. A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Sheriff Bradley's voice came through the wood. "Time, folks." Isabella stood and smoothed her skirt. She walked to the safe and spun the combination. The heavy door swung open, revealing neat stacks of bills and small bags of coins. The bank's entire fortune there for the taking. She closed the safe without touching a single dollar. "I won't take their money," she said quietly. "This town has been good to me. They gave me work when I needed it, a place to belong. I won't betray that trust, even for you." Joaquín nodded. He hadn't expected her to do anything else. His sister had always been the moral center of their family, the one who reminded the rest of them what was right. The door opened, and Bradley stepped inside. He held the shackles in one hand, but he didn't rush to put them on. "Ready?" he asked gently. Joaquín stood. He walked to his sister and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Hermana. I never stopped loving you." "I love you too," she whispered. "Come back to me, Quinn. However long it takes, however hard the road, come back to me." Bradley stepped forward and clasped the irons around Joaquín's wrists. The metal was cold and heavy, but somehow it didn't feel like chains. It felt like the first step on a different path. They walked out of the bank together into the cool desert night. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human sorrow but witness to human hope. Isabella locked the bank behind them and pocketed the key. Tomorrow she would return to her ordinary life of counting money and keeping books. But tonight, she had gotten her brother back, even if she was about to lose him again. As they walked toward the jail, Joaquín looked back once. Isabella stood in the street, silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from the bank windows. She raised her hand in farewell, and he raised his shackled hands in return. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and the possibility of death. But for the first time in 10 years, Joaquín Morales was not walking alone.